the store, and then it seems like Sony didn't either, and these developers who are pushing this stuff out into the ecosystem are just taking advantage of these weird lapses in rules. Lately, though, a lot of the storefront owners are cracking down on this stuff. I just talked about it on Deck Ready, but Valve, they just implemented a rule where if you have a game that shows in-game advertising, so if it's a flip of a mobile game, like, you know, when you're playing a free-to-play mobile game and you run out of gas in a racing game or something, it's like you want to recharge that, you can pay money or you can watch an ad. Any game that has ads enabled like that is not allowed on Steam anymore. And it's funny because Ubisoft, of all publishers, was working on getting a system like that implemented in their games. So if they do that, their games are not going to be available on Steam, which is good. And then to crack down on abandoned early access titles, because that was a scam a lot of developers were running. You know, they put something together that was like 60% done. They launched it into early access. They get a lot of sales based on the initial gameplay. They do a couple of updates just to make it look like they were still updating the game, and then they take the money and run and disappear. So now when you go to Steam and you look at an early access game, you'll see a little box that tells you after 12 months how long it's been since that developer released an update. And I've been hoping that Sony, I actually said this in my video on Deck Ready, but I was like, I hope Sony implements a similar strategy here, because while Steam is big, it's the biggest PC store, the gaming storefront wars as a whole are dominated by Sony, because most people have PlayStation consoles. So if Valve's doing it, I kind of expect Sony to do the same thing, and it looks like they finally are. The main publisher culprit on the PlayStation Store lately has been Random Spin. They've been making asset flip games that are just clones of other stuff for years now. They've been making body cam shooter games. They've been making stuff like Backrooms Escape. They've been making random simulator games that don't really work. Like anything like Power Wash Simulator. That's a legit game made by Future Lab. People really like it. Square Enix published it. If they can make their own budget ripoff, not even functional version of that and throw it up on the PlayStation Store, that's what they're going to do. They're going to make that in a weekend and throw it up. All of those games are disappearing. Sony is going through the PlayStation Store with a fine-tooth comb, and they're taking all of this stuff down so that it's not only not available to purchase, because I'm sure they were getting a ton of refund requests, which is probably the only reason they've even done this in the first place, but it also is getting rid of the clog on the search terms on the PlayStation Store, and I think that's good overall. The one downside here, I guess, is that they could go back to how stringent they were about this stuff in the PS3 and PS4 era, at least the early PS4 era, where like you had to go through a ton of hoops to get your game on the PlayStation Store, and then in the later half of the PS4 era and introducing into the PS5 era, they made it a lot more lax, so like a lot of people could get their games on the store, you know, these single-person teams. They made it easy for these people to talk to Sony, get their game on the PlayStation Store, and get the word out there. Because back in the day, when indie games were kind of taken off, you would see so many examples of games that were made by small development teams that were released on PC, and then people would be like, why isn't this also on console? And they'd be like, we literally don't know how to talk to Sony. So Sony did a good job making it so that they could not only talk to them, but get their games on the store in the first place. And I think that's what they got to protect, right? Like, get rid of all this shovelware crap that's clogging up searches and everything like that, and giving people bad games that don't even work right, but also keep it easy for real developers to actually get their games on the store. I don't know if they need to hire someone to kind of go through everything that's submitted with a fine-tooth comb and just say, if this is legit, it can stay. If it's fucked, it can go, or something like that. Or if they can develop some AI large language model to do it, whatever they got to do to make sure that small indie teams can still get their games on the PlayStation Store, but also at the same time get rid of these crappy garbage games. I feel like that's exactly what they gotta do. When it comes to the PlayStation Store, the future is a little weird because, you know, all these other companies like Microsoft and Games, they want to get their storefronts on iOS and Android, so like if there's a game like Fall Guys or, I don't know, Pentiment or something like that, they could make iPhone versions of those games and have them available through that store. You would give the money to Microsoft or, you know, Epic Games in that case, or Fortnite. This is another great example of a game that they want to get on the iOS store without putting it on the App Store. And I feel like Sony obviously is going to want to do the same thing. They have a huge classics library of PSP games, Vita games, PS2 games, PS1 games, PSP games that they could just throw up on the store, and then you could buy them through that. It'd sync with your PlayStation Network account. You get trophies, you're saved for transfer and everything like that. I also think it'd be cool if Sony made their own at least launcher for PC, so that when you play PC Sony games, they have better integration than just trophies and friendless seeding. If they make it so you can transfer saves back and forth from PC, they're going to go from getting $70.
Across the country, we are seeing waves of Canadian pride in response to U.S. President Donald Trump's tariff threats. Politicians, even former prime ministers, are encouraging people to show their support. And CBC's Mark Parkus will tell the story and joins me now. So, Mark, this support is being encouraged ahead of an important day.
Yes, it is a very important day. Tomorrow is Flag Day, and it's a day that I think up until now many of us have just sort of seen as the day it's noted on a calendar if you bought it in Canada, and it kind of, yeah, we love Canada and all that, but it is certainly seeing some renewed focus today with, as Andrew mentioned, not only the threats of tariffs, but also the constant rhetoric on the part of the U.S. president about Canada eventually becoming the 51st state. You can say it's a joke, you can say it's just amusing, you can say it's just a strategy on his part, but it definitely is rubbing a lot of people the wrong way, and he did it again yesterday in the Oval Office when he was talking about his list of reciprocal tariffs, including Canada. He took aim at our digital services tax. He says Canada is not paying its 2% of GDP share of NATO defense spending, which is in fact accurate. You can't fault him on that one. And he just insists that Canada would be a better place if it was the United States.
Canada is just about the lowest payer. Also, just, they shouldn't be. They are just about the lowest payer in NATO, in addition to everything else. So Canada's really been taken advantage of. And if they had to pay just something modestly fair, they wouldn't be able to succeed as a country. And that's why I feel they have to become a state.
So those harsh words bring us back to the point of Flag Day, an open letter from the 5 still living prime ministers issued Joe Clark, Kim Campbell, Jean Chrétien, Paul Martin, and Stephen Harper, telling Canadians to show the flag as never before this year on February 15th. Let's fly our flag with pride, they say. Let's show the world that we are proud of our history and proud of our country. All great things that you should be every day, 365 days a year, certainly, but tomorrow, especially, according to them. However, there are those out there who feel that we need to take a more aggressive approach in responding to the rhetoric coming out of the White House. One of those people is NDP MP Charlie Angus, who took time during a news conference to say that we need to do more. We need to boycott.
Now, some might think, well, if you just choose not to go down to Tennessee this year, who's going to notice? Well, right now, we're seeing the American tourism industry is in full-on panic. There are now over $2 billion in travel that is at risk.
Our vice president is speaking in Munich right now. Listen.
One of the things that I wanted to talk about today is, of course, our shared values. And it's great to be back in Germany. As you heard earlier, I was here last year as United States Senator. I saw Foreign Secretary David Lammy and joked that both of us last year had different jobs than we have now. But now it's time for all of our countries, for all of us who have been fortunate enough to be given political power by our respective peoples, to use it wisely to improve their lives. And I want to say that, I was fortunate in my time here to spend some time outside the walls of this conference over the last 24 hours. And I've been so impressed by the hospitality of the people, even as, of course, as they're reeling from yesterday's horrendous attack. And the first time I was ever in Munich was with my wife, actually, who's here with me today, on a personal trip. And I've always loved the city of Munich, and I've always loved its people. And I just want to say that we're very moved, and our thoughts and prayers are with Munich and everybody affected by the evil inflicted on this beautiful community. We're thinking about you, we're praying for you, and we'll certainly be rooting for you in the days and weeks to come. Now, I hope that's not the last bit of applause that I get, but we gather at this conference, of course, to discuss security, and normally we mean threats to our external security. I see many great military leaders gathered here today. But while the Trump administration is very concerned with European security and believes that we can come to a reasonable settlement between Russia and Ukraine, And we also believe that it's important in the coming years for Europe to step up in a big way to provide for its own defense. The threat that I worry the most about vis-a-vis Europe is not Russia, it's not China, it's not any other external actor. And what I worry about is the threat from within, the retreat of Europe from some of its most fundamental values, values shared with the United States of America. Now, I was struck that a former European commissioner went on television recently and sounded delighted that the Romanian government had just annulled an entire election. He warned that if things don't go to plan, the very same thing could happen in Germany too. Now, these cavalier statements are shocking to American ears. For years, we've been told that everything we fund and support is in the name of our shared democratic values. Everything from our Ukraine policy to digital censorship is billed as a defense of democracy. But when we see European courts canceling elections and senior officials threatening to cancel others, we ought to ask whether we're holding ourselves to an appropriately high standard. And I say ourselves because I fundamentally believe we're on the same team. We must do more than talk about democratic values, we must live them. Now, within living memory of many of you in this room, the Cold War positioned defenders of democracy against much more tyrannical forces on this continent. And consider the side in that fight that censored dissidents, that closed churches, that canceled elections. Were they the good guys? Certainly not. And thank God they lost the Cold War. They lost because they neither valued nor respected all of the extraordinary blessings of liberty. The freedom to surprise, to make mistakes, to invent, to build. As it turns out, you can't mandate innovation or creativity, just as you can't force people what to think, what to feel, or what to believe. And we believe those things are certainly connected. And unfortunately, when I look at Europe today, it's sometimes not so clear what led to some of the Cold War's winners. I look to Brussels, where EU commissars warn citizens that they intend to shut down social media during times of civil unrest the moment they spot what they've judged to be, quote, hateful content. Or to this very country, where police have carried out raids against citizens suspected of posting anti-feminist comments online as part of, quote, combating misogyny on the internet, a day of action. I look to Sweden, where 2 weeks ago the government convicted a Christian activist for participating in Koran burnings that resulted in his friend's murder. And as the judge in his case chillingly noted, Sweden's laws supposedly protect free expression do not, in fact, grant, and I'm quoting, a free pass to do or say anything without risking offending the group that holds that belief. And perhaps most concerningly, I look to our very dear friends, the United Kingdom, where the backslide away from conscience rights has placed the basic liberties of religious Britons in particular in the crosshairs. A little over 2 years ago, the British government charged Adam Smith Connor, a 51-year-old physiotherapist and an Army veteran, with the heinous crime of standing 50 meters from an abortion clinic and silently praying for 3 minutes. Not obstructing anyone, not interacting with anyone, just silently praying on his own. And after British law enforcement spotted him and demanded to know what he was praying for, Adam replied simply, it was on behalf of the unborn son he and his former girlfriend had aborted years before. Now, the officers were not moved. Adam was found guilty of breaking the government's new buffer zones law, which criminalizes silent prayer and other actions that could influence a person's decision within 200 meters of an abortion facility. He was sentenced to pay thousands of pounds in legal costs to the prosecution. Now, I wish I could say that this was a fluke, a one-off crazy example of a badly written law being enacted against a single person, but no. This last October, just a few months ago, the Scottish government began distributing letters to citizens whose houses lay within so-called safe access zones, warning them that even private prayer in their own homes may amount to breaking the law. Naturally, the government urged readers to report any fellow citizen suspected guilty of thought crime. In Britain and across Europe, free speech, I believe, is in retreat. And in the interest of comedy, my friends, but also in the interest of truth, I will admit that sometimes the loudest voices for censorship have come not from within Europe, but from within my own country, where the prior administration threatened and bullied social media companies to censor so-called misinformation. Misinformation like, for example, the idea that coronavirus had likely leaked from a laboratory in China. Our own government encouraged private companies to silence people who dared to utter what turned out to be an obvious truth. So I come here today not just with an observation, but with an offer. And just as the Biden administration seemed desperate to silence people for speaking their minds, so the Trump administration will do precisely the opposite, and I hope that we can work together on that. In Washington, there is a new sheriff in town, and under Donald Trump's leadership, we may disagree with your views, but we will fight to defend your right to offer it in the public square, agree or disagree.
Final warning.
Now, we're at the point, of course, that the situation has gotten so bad that this December, Romania straight up canceled the results of a presidential election based on the flimsy suspicions of an intelligence agency and enormous pressure from its continental neighbors. Now, as I understand it, the argument was that Russian disinformation had infected the Romanian elections. But I'd ask my European friends to have some perspective. You can believe it's wrong for Russia to buy social media advertisements to influence your elections. We certainly do. You can condemn it on the world stage even. But if your democracy can be destroyed with a few $100,000 of digital advertising from a foreign country, then it wasn't very strong to begin with. Now, the good news is that I happen to think your democracies are substantially less brittle than many people apparently fear. And I really do believe that allowing our citizens to speak their mind will make them stronger still. Which, of course, brings us back to Munich, where the organizers of this very conference have banned lawmakers representing populist parties on both the left and the right from participating in these conversations. Now, again, we don't have to agree with everything or anything that people say. But when people represent, when political leaders represent an important constituency, it is incumbent upon us to at least participate in dialogue with them. Now, to many of us on the other side of the Atlantic, it looks more and more like old entrenched interests hiding behind ugly Soviet-era words like misinformation and disinformation, who simply don't like the idea that somebody with an alternative viewpoint might express a different opinion or, God forbid, vote a different way or, even worse, win an election. Now, this is a security conference, and I'm sure you all came here prepared to talk about how exactly you intend to increase defense spending over the next few years in line with some new target. And that's great, because as President Trump has made abundantly clear, he believes that our European friends must play a bigger role in the future of this continent. We don't think, you hear this term, burden sharing, but we think it's an important part of being in a shared alliance together that the Europeans step up while America focuses on areas of the world that are in great danger. But let me also ask you, how will you even begin to think through the kinds of budgeting questions if we don't know what it is that we are defending in the first place? I've heard a lot already in my conversations, and I've had many, many great conversations with many people gathered here in this room. I've heard a lot about what you need to defend yourselves from, and of course that's important. But what has seemed a little bit less clear to me, and certainly I think to many of the citizens of Europe, is what exactly it is that you're defending yourselves for. What is the positive vision that animates this shared security compact that we all believe is so important? And I believe deeply that there is no security if you are afraid of the voices, the opinions, and the conscience that guide your very own people. Europe faces many challenges, but the crisis this continent faces right now, the crisis I believe we all face together, is one of our own making. If you're running in fear of your own voters, there is nothing America can do for you. Nor, for that matter, is there anything that you can do for the American people who elected me and elected President Trump. You need democratic mandates to accomplish anything of value in the coming years. If we learn nothing, that thin mandates produce unstable results. But there is so much of value that can be accomplished with the kind of democratic mandate that I think will come from being more responsive to the voices of your citizens. If you're going to enjoy competitive economies, if you're going to enjoy affordable energy and secure supply chains, then you need mandates to govern, because you have to make difficult choices to enjoy all of these things. And of course,
you were listening to the Vice President of the United States of America, J.D. Vance, speaking at the Munich Security Conference, talking about, obviously, defense spending, but also really pulling back the curtain on what's happening in Europe.
Congresswoman, I'd like to ask you.
A controversial game. Shrouded. We did not even know a month ago if this game was going to release. People thought it was going to be delayed, and they said, no, it's not. It's coming out today, and here it is. Does y'all ready? Why'd the music go away? It's a bug? All right. Let's see. Oh, give me a minute. I'm going to use the bathroom. Tell me if it turns back on. Yeah, tell me if it turns back on, Gus. It worked! Hey, we got the music back! Not a bug. Alright. Let's do it. Bro, the devs are watching. Let's get it.
Aora, a world where mortals live, die, and are reborn, the turning of the wheel, in a cycle of reincarnation, watched over by the gods.
Oh, wow.
Our gods, some of whom love us more than others. Your hope, the Adira Empire, is treasure, but
who's balding?
Vengeance. But our goddess has lately turned her eyes from us, and our empire was summoned.
It sounds bad.
Ram challenges to right forward. We lack a common purpose, but we could find it in the living land.
That's where we have to go.
A rich and lawless island, settled by fugitives.
This is America. Or Australia.
And yet the more we free this place from danger, the more the land fights back. And now, as our colonists crowd into Paradise, the last safe city, the locals find themselves crowded out.
Oh, they got gentrified. Get them out.
You were born to a family in our Adira Empire, and in a rare turn of the wheel, you came into this world a godlike